Ooh.
Did it go?
I think it's on. Yeah, it says
All
it's
right.
there.
Sometimes I have some computer issues. I just wanted to make sure it was on before we started up. Hello, everyone. My name is Allegra. I'm an advocate at Access, and I am going to be kind of the moderator on this DVAM panel. So without further ado, I want to get to the folks who are actually here to answer some questions. So if you just want to start, Anasia, with introducing yourself, your job, and how long you've been in the anti-violence field.
Cool, sure. Thanks, Allegra. Like she said, my name is Anasia, Anasia Sturdivant, and I work for Access, the Assault Care Center. We cover 5 counties, just kind of straight across 30, Highway 30, so Tama, Marshall, Story, Boone, and Green. And my position is on the domestic abuse team as a youth and campus advocate. So I work primarily with people that are 24 and under, but I also just work with any survivors that need services as well. And I've been with Access pretty much since I interned in 2009, and probably in the anti-violence movement a little before that, I'd say, during my college years and late high school. So.
And Jody, same question. I'll be asking the same questions of both of you throughout this.
My name is Jody Bowden Fuentes, and I am the Domestic Violence Program Coordinator for Latinas Unidos por un Nuevo Amanecer, LUNA. We are a statewide culturally specific agency that works with people who identify within the Latinx community. I have been with LUNA for 5 years. However, I have worked in the anti-violence field for a total of about 8 years now. I started my career in the shelter.
Okay, so we have lots of experience between the two of you. And I'm really excited to help moderate this. So a couple questions. I'll kind of let you choose who goes first. For people who are watching who may not know, in your own words, what is domestic violence?
Would you like to go, Jody, or you want?
I think that in practice, what we see and what is often overlooked is that domestic violence is any type of an abuse, of an imbalance in power within an intimate relationship. It does not necessarily mean physical violence, bruises and black eyes and so on. We recognize that easily. But there are so many more layers to what that violence looks like for families.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, what Jody said, I think a lot of times people hear violence and they tend to forget that it's more than just that physical aspect. So like we say domestic abuse a lot so that they can know it's more encompassing of a lot of other facets of those relationships. So like whether it's, that emotional abuse that we see from a lot of our clients, more so than you see that physical because of that. And so I'd say domestic abuse is more of looking at that pattern of course of behavior that's used to have power and control over a partner, and being able to recognize those signs is kind of what domestic abuse is.
Yeah, thank you so much. I am using the term domestic violence just because the official name of this awareness month is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But I really appreciate both of those insights and the use of the language saying domestic abuse as opposed to domestic violence. So thank you for elaborating on that. To kind of follow up on that question, and to make it easier, I'll just call one of you out and then have the other one respond after that so we don't talk over each other. Jody, who experiences domestic violence or domestic abuse?
Everyone. Men, women, LGBTQI communities, children. We oftentimes overlook them. However, children that are growing up in a domestic violence home are victims of childhood domestic violence. And that violence overlaps and contributes to long-term trauma, raised ACEs scores, and the potential for repeating that cycle of violence in their own relationships as adults.
for someone who might not know, what is an ACEs score?
ACEs score, I can't identify specifically the acronym. It is a measure of childhood trauma. The higher the score, it's generally a 1 to 10 time frame. The higher the score, the more impactful trauma has been on that individual's life.
Thank you. And then Anasia, same question for you, if you want to elaborate on what Jody said.
Sure.
Kind of
and then ACEs, yeah, and then ACEs, it's adverse childhood experiences, and so yeah, like I would probably say the same thing as Jody, just that echo that it can happen to anyone, it can affect anyone, and I think that that's something that a lot of people forget, that if it can happen to anyone, that means it can happen anywhere. And a lot of people are like, well, no, it doesn't happen here. Like, well, it can happen to anyone. So therefore, again, it can happen anywhere. And so, yeah, just being more cognizant of that, like anybody can be a survivor, and therefore anybody also can be an abuser or perpetrator, whatever term someone wants to use, but anyone can cause harm as well.
Thank you both for that. As you both alluded to or said explicitly in your answers, that it can happen even in our own communities, even if we aren't sure that we're seeing it. To follow up on that, are there any common myths or misconceptions about domestic violence you want to debunk? Anasia, I'll have you start first this time.
I'd say one of the most common ones is that like it has to be stereotypically this small, frail woman is the survivor, and it's this big football build player dude is the perpetrator, and that's one of those myths that I feel like are finally starting to fall off a little bit. People are finally starting to understand that, survivors can look like anybody, they can be anybody, and I think that that's good that we're moving in the right direction with that. But there's still a lot of other barriers along that same thread of myths of like when it happens, and it only happens to married couples or traditional families or something like that. I think a lot of those myths are still out there, but I feel like we're finally starting to realize that it's not just that 30-something married couple, male, female, heteronormative kind of relationship thing going on, and that families just look different now. And so that intimate partner violence can be two college students, or it can be an elderly couple, or anything in between. And understanding that kind of will help drop off a lot of those myths. But I feel like right now we're still pushing through them. As long as we keep that community awareness and keep talking about it and keep that conversation going, it's definitely going to help like fade away some of those myths of like that this is the only time it happens is at home, and that it's not my problem or my business type thing.
Thank you. And Jody, do you have any other myths or anything you want to build on that?
The myth that leaving will guarantee safety.
Mm-hmm.
That is probably one of the most destructive, most untrue myths about domestic violence, is that when the survivor leaves the relationship, she will automatically be safe. We know that not to be true. And for some of the survivors that we work with, their safest option with the resources that are available to them is to stay in the relationship. So that idea that if you leave, you'll be safe, it's not accurate.
Yeah, it's like when people keep asking that question, like, why don't they just leave? And it's like, you don't know their whole situation, one, but also like that might not be the safest option. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Profoundly dangerous to end one of these relationships.
I think that's a really good point to bring up, because even as an advocate myself, although I work in a different realm of the anti-violence movement, that's something I often need to be reminded as well. So thank you so much for bringing that up. To move forward, and I'll, sorry, I don't know why I can't read right now. Anasia, are there warning signs that someone is experiencing domestic violence?
Definitely. Those warning signs are gonna look different by each relationship that you see, but there are some common ones you can notice that someone else is experiencing domestic violence. So if you're not talking about your own relationship, think about someone else's. Usually, you might notice like there might be physical signs, of course. So if you see bruises, things like that can show you that there might be physical violence happening. But as far as those other types of violence happen, like that financial abuse, that controlling behavior, it really depends on what your dynamic and relationship is with that survivor or with that perpetrator to know that there is violence in that relationship. And so I say some of those warning signs, for instance, could be noticing if how someone reacts when their partner talks to them in a healthy dynamic. Usually it's not that kind of shuddered or feeling like a child experience. You don't see that as often, whereas in an unhealthy relationship, you do see that kind of behavior, and that those reactions. Flinching would be another physical reaction you might see, but also just noticing the language that people use. So paying attention to like maybe the way my friend talks is like, oh, this just happened, but that's out of character for them. That doesn't always happen. You hear those statements over and over again. It's a huge red flag that like something, there's a little bit more happening in that relationship. And just being, if you have that comfortable enough relationship with that person, being open and honest with them, being like, are you okay? It's okay to ask that straight question. You know, you don't have to say, do they hit you? Like, you know, but just asking straight up, like, are you okay? Is there something I can do for you? Can I even just make a run to the store for you? And like having that, it kind of opens up to show that other people are seeing these warning signs as well.
And Jody, same question. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think one of the first signs that we see in a lot of the families that we work with is a shift in behavior, the beginning of isolation, the lack of connection with family, friends, previous activities start to decrease. That's a really good, definitely lives change and priorities change and people abandon things that they've done. But when that abandonment of lifetime connections begins around or close to the time of a new relationship, that is definitely something to follow up on. And I agree. We all are in cars with each other. We hear conversations on the phone. And when you hear that conversation that is really not appropriate, and you start to see that reaction of fear when that person's name pops up on someone's phone, it's time to have that conversation.
And that's a perfect.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say to add something on the flip side of that too is that like, we might not be friends with the survivor, but we actually might be friends with that person causing harm, and noticing their behavior changes too, and pointing out to them, because they're not gonna listen to the person they're causing harm to, or they wouldn't be causing harm to that person. And so
that's a really good point.
Yeah. So if you're friends with that person, talking to them, because you notice their changes in behavior too. You're like, you don't act like this at work. Like, why are you treating your partner like that? You don't snap off on your boss. Like, and so also those warning signs too is noticing if your friends are starting to perpetrate negative behaviors, being able to mention that as well.
That's a wonderful point. And you had both kind of mentioned this before. Jody, I'd like to hear from you first on expanding on this. Is if you do feel that somebody is in an abusive relationship or is experiencing domestic abuse or domestic violence, what is a way that someone who isn't used to having those discussions, how can they start having that discussion with someone? And you can also say how you might have a discussion with the person, like Anasia said, if they're the person causing harm. What are some other things that you could do to start that combo?
Being the friend of a survivor can be very challenging because we see these things and we want to respect each other's boundaries and we want to respect everybody's privacy. But at the same time, we have an opportunity to support that person, and they might not have any other fountain of support. So just keeping the door open, reminding that person that they're always going to be safe if they need to come to your home, if they need help, if they need a ride. Just making sure you keep that communication open. A lot of times survivors aren't able to keep up with their friends, their families, and they become more and more distant and more isolated. Making the effort to follow up and check on and follow through and set aside judgment. It's not our place to bash on someone's partner. And a lot of people are very protective of their partner in their own ways, rather than attacking the partner, just supporting the survivor, really wrapping resources and support around that person. And I know that within our services, we find that the primary supporters of abusers are family members. So if it is your family member, that should be called out. And regardless of the fact that that may be your brother, your cousin, whoever it may be, we have an obligation to keep that person safe, the survivor safe, and any children that may be involved in that relationship as well. And sometimes it's a decision about priorities, and it's a decision and an evaluation of vulnerability. And at the end of the day, if my brother were an abuser, my obligation would be to my sister-in-law and their children, and finding him support and holding him accountable so that he has the opportunity to change his behaviors.
Did you have anything else to add, Anisha? You had already talked a little bit about how to approach people.
Just the one thing, just like that. I mean, that was very well put. So, not much. Just that, start by believing. It's something we use in the anti-violence movement. Is so simple and something so easy you can do. Like, so if you think that your friend is experiencing domestic violence, like, and you're having that conversation with them, and they say something, letting them know that, like, you believe what they're saying. Because sometimes they might drop little hints, and then they kind of see how you react to that. And the way you react might indicate whether or not they're like, should I keep this conversation going? Or should I tell someone else? And so if you show that, like, hey, I believe you and I'm here for you, then they know that there's still someone in their corner. Because, like, even when Jody mentioned earlier, so many of them are isolated. So many survivors get isolated so early on in those relationships from their family and their friends and their community connections that they feel like there isn't anyone else there. So when they start dropping these little nuggets of, like, I feel like my relationship isn't right, but I still love my partner, then it's like they don't know where to go from there. And so just letting them know, like, hey, whatever you decide, I'm here to talk, or I'm here to help you find resources for someone who can talk, who might know more about this. And so just once you believe them, showing that you believe them, and because, they're not coming to you as a detective and asking you to investigate their relationship. They're talking to you as a friend or family member and asking you to just kind of listen and be there and just be an ear, like, support them through the means that you have to support them. So, like, if your means are you can chill on Saturday night with them, chill on Saturday night with them. If your means is that they need $200 to pay a light bill, sure, give it to them if that's what you have. Like, provide support within your means so that you can still help them as the individual that they are.
Mm-hmm. Now, those are both great points. Both of you made really good. You're all going to be having wonderful answers all the time, but I do appreciate your input and all of your experience in this. You both kind of touched on resources. So I'll start with Jody again. What are some resources in the community for survivors?
I think the resources that are available have really expanded and developed over the last 10 to 15 years. We still don't have enough resources. However, we have the 1-800, the domestic hotline. Almost all of the agencies that I'm aware of in the state of Iowa have an emergency hotline as well, a crisis line. 211 throughout the state of Iowa is a great resource, because along with domestic violence come myriad other problems, and just finding some kind of a place to start. And a lot of the resource fountains, those sources of information, as we get further away from the metro into rural areas, are more and more limited. They're still there, but they may be harder to look for. So we've really worked closely with a lot of the county coalitions and the state coalitions to get as much information as we can out. Luna is statewide, so we partner with all of our mainstream partners throughout the state of Iowa. So I may not be able to go to court with you in Davenport, but we can find someone who can. It's a collaboration and it's cooperative, and we're making the most of the limited resources that we do have available. We look forward to a day when domestic violence is viewed as a public health crisis rather than a family issue.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I like the way that you put that. That this is a health epidemic. Basically, it's like people aren't thinking about that, and I would love when we get even more resources. But I guess a few other resources is also that we work with a lot of housing different programs. So like whether it's a homeless shelter in some of our communities, if for whatever reason we can't house that survivor, is another resource that we do tap sometimes. Those other agencies like local communities that help pay for utilities or help pay for rent and deposit. So if the safe option is to leave, then those clients can get that as well if we can't provide it for whatever reason. And then also there's a few government resources as well. So we always try to make sure that they are aware of like what they can apply for, to get on waiting lists right away for things that are government related. Usually there's a waiting list, and helping people that might not have documentation, helping them figure out what resources are available for them as well, so that they can still feel secure. Because there's also a lot of myths that they hear that they can't have any resources. And so we try to make sure that they know where those are or how to get connected with folks that can help them get those resources. Would be a few more.
Thank you both so much for that information. I just wanted to clarify something that Jody said. She said that Luna works with mainstream agencies, and what a mainstream agency is just kind of like there's culturally specific, meaning like Luna, where they're working with the Latinx community. And then there's mainstream, meaning we do work with everyone, but we may not necessarily have those resources available. For example, bilingual and biculturally educated or biculturally race advocates. I don't know why I can't say that word right now, but there are mainstream, and those culturally specific agencies are amazing. The mainstream ones, we are a little more spread out, and we do have that because every single county in Iowa has access to a mainstream agency for an advocate, where we have different resource centers, whereas like this culturally specific ones are statewide. So it's great that we have these amazing relationships with the culturally specific agencies, and we really appreciate you guys.
Yeah. And we couldn't do what we do without the support of mainstream partners. It's that simple.
Right.
We're a staff of 10 for the entire state, and we cannot do what we do without the support of our local partners. You guys know your neighborhoods, you know what resources, you know the best path to safety in your area, and we depend on that to help people in our community. And we really try to bridge the gap between the Latinx community and the mainstream community and empower our people to access those resources, because they are sometimes complicated, sometimes harder to access, depending on status or English capabilities or whatever the case may be. We are blessed to be one of 7 culturally specifics within the state of Iowa. And I think that we have long-standing relationships. We always have worked with Access. We work with CFI here in Des Moines. We work with DSOC. We work with all of the major mainstream community support. And without you guys, we couldn't do what we do. And by doing what we do, we save your staff from having to learn things that may be very unusual to them or very complex. As far as like immigration relief and some of those processes, we can't expect everybody so we all share that knowledge. Everybody brings something to the table. And we do greatly appreciate our mainstream partners.
And the same on our end, yeah. Like we truly appreciate how much you all bring to the table. And I think that not a lot of people know or recognize how much that co-advocacy is so important to help survivors. Like it has to be done. Like, and it makes it so much easier and simpler for the survivor when we have these long-lasting relationships that help kind of just make it an easy smooth over between this resource and this resource and this resource for the survivors to be able start their healing path and find safety.
100%. I am so grateful for Luna and for every culturally specific agency that works with us as well. And Nasia, I'll start you with this next question. What's something happening in our community that you're excited about or that you think is really important?
Ooh, dun, dun, dun. Something exciting. I mean, currently it is DMAM, so that's pretty exciting. To like be like there is time set aside to be able to kind of promote like awareness so that more people are aware of what's going on in our communities. Something else I'm excited about though would probably be how much the schools seem to be reaching out more about, hey, come talk about healthy relationships and unhealthy dynamics, and something that I don't remember at all growing up. Like I don't remember anybody coming in and talking to us, and if you asked the teacher a question, it was a very short answer about like dating and relationships and stuff. And a lot of youth unfortunately don't talk to their parents in depth about their dating relationships, especially if they're not supposed to date. Like I think I was told not to date till I was 30 or something like that when I was in middle school. And that's just not the reality behind it. And so that's something I am excited about to see how that growth is happening in our communities, how teachers and professors at the colleges that we help are looking for resources like ours and telling folks like, hey, there's this resource, and like all of our agencies that fall under ICADVA and ICASA are free services. And so being able to let people know and get that word out continually that like, hey, we're not going to turn someone away because they can't afford to get help, you know, and that we can be confidential. So that does make me excited that more folks seem to be more aware that there are resources like Luna and other CSPs, as well as Access and other mainstreams out there for survivors. It seems to be working, I guess, so to say, the awareness. And so we could just keep that up. That'd be great.
And Jody, what about you?
I am incredibly thankful to the initiators of Me Too. We are having the conversation. We are recognizing that survivors are everywhere. They may not be able to tell their stories today, but at some point in the future, we hope that they will feel free enough to share those experiences and educate the community. This is kind of a complex issue within our work, but I'm really glad to see us moving away from criminalization and towards education, recognizing that abusers also carry trauma while not excusing it, but not just locking them up and throwing away the key, but really working towards long-term healing and the end of that cycle of abuse. Me Too opened that up. Black Lives Matter is celebrating communities that have been set aside, overlooked, and underrepresented in everything that we do, in every aspect. So we definitely are very excited and hopeful for a future where everyone gets a voice, everyone is heard, everyone has options. And I really feel that Me Too opened the door for that and made it a conversation that wasn't just held behind closed doors. We're having those conversations, and that conversation is raising awareness. Only by being aware of these things are we going to improve them and overcome them, and hopefully within a generation or two, hopefully, domestic violence can be a rarity instead of pretty much a common childhood experience.
Right.
Thank you. That's a super powerful statement too, to talk about how the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movements are intersected with domestic abuse and domestic violence. I think that's an important thing to bring up. So thank you so much, both of you. And we're coming up to the end. So I have one more question for each of you. So I'll start with you, Jody. What's something that you've learned that you wish the public or that you wish your community knew about domestic violence?
I really wish that people understood that even though your children don't see it, they know. I wish they realized that. I think that there are a lot of families where the abuse is minimized, or survivors are willing to continue with the relationship because he doesn't hit me in front of the children. He may not hit you in front of the children, but he disrespects you in front of the children. He humiliates you in front of the children. And your children hear those things. And as soon as we can recognize the impact of this on our kids, and the fact that it's not just happening at the neighbor's house, your neighbor's child goes to school with my child. It is happening to every one of our children, every one of our immediate relatives, our neighbors, our partners. It's like the rock in the lake. The ripples of the domestic violence reach out into every aspect. It is well and truly a public health emergency that has been overlooked and minimized for generations. And Me Too opened the door to have that conversation. So I'm incredibly proud of that group of survivors and the bravery that opened doors for all of us to do our work more effectively.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And then Anisha, same question.
Yeah, just I was kind of thinking the same train of thought though. Great minds. Especially being a youth advocate, like it's amazing how many times the youth that I've worked with say like, well, they don't know that I know, or they don't think I know. And how many times I've heard parents say, well, my kid doesn't really need services because they don't know what's going on. They just know that we're probably going to be moving. And so I maybe was thinking they could talk to someone. I'm like, they probably know. And that's a continuous conversation that we seem to have. And so if we can somehow integrate that more into our community to let folks know that like people are aware of what's going on. It's just we've been taught so much about hush hush with everything in our society as a whole that we tend to gloss over things or pretend like it's not happening or something isn't as bad, or we compare relationships that we see to TV and movies and media. And so we minimize the survivor's experience and the violence that's happening in that relationship. And so I think if as a community, we can kind of come together a little bit more in understanding that like this is affecting our children and therefore affecting our next generation, our next leaders, our next doctors, our next psychiatrists. Like these are the people that are going to be taking over. And if we're not taking care of them now, we'll end up in the same cycle that we are currently still in. And we can't kind of fix anything if we don't acknowledge that there's a problem and start working on it and working towards how can we make things better for folks. I mean, I wish I can say I wake up one day and they're like, oh, you don't have a job anymore because everyone's being great human beings. That would be amazing. Like, I mean, I'd go open up a wooden toy shop and like start making toys. Like, I don't know, like something else. But I don't see that happening in my lifetime. But I would love for it to be where more people are aware and there are more resources because of the community is acknowledging that this is an issue and that this is happening. Whether it's because we think about our children and most people seem to care more when we talk about kids, or whether we could just get some folks to kind of open their eyes and spread the word. So, yeah.
Yeah. I would like to retire knowing that there will be no more need for what we do.
Right.
But I think that opening the door to the conversation, the healthy relationships education that we're seeing in schools, the shift in expectations of what a relationship would look like, that's great progress. And so I guard hope, maybe not for my kids or your kids, but maybe our grandkids, maybe. And I think that's the fire that keeps us going, is that one day the public health crisis of domestic violence will end.
Yeah, I think
that is our dream. That's what we want, is for the violence to end.
Right. I think that that's what makes it so important, is that will help that violence end, is that that acknowledgement in general. And that whole like just to reiterate it one more time, is like talking to those folks that are causing harm, you know, like we so often put blame on the survivor, and it's like, come on, y'all, we got to do better than this. Like, sit down and have a conversation. Like, we talked about decriminalizing, like not having like, oh, you go straight to jail, like they might have some trauma history. Talking to them, being like, hey, like, have you ever thought about going to counseling or therapy, or have you thought about your behaviors and your actions? Would be a great thing to talk to our communities about. Be like, when you see something happen, whether it's domestic violence or even sexual violence, human trafficking, all the other services that we provide, it's like, have we thought about having those conversations with those people that are causing that harm and causing that trauma, so that if they stop their behaviors, that automatically knocks out so much that's happening to survivors. So, yeah.
And normalizing counseling, normalizing healing, normalizing recognizing that you grew up in a home with violence. And not, I can assure you that there are families who would keep that secret just because they don't want to shame someone. It's not shameful.
Right.
They did the best they could with what they have. We know better now. We have options. And really normalizing access to that support, I think, will be a key to eliminating this and having safe homes.
I couldn't agree more. I think you both said that way better than I'd be able to. I really appreciate your time. I agree wholeheartedly that it would be great if I woke up one morning and didn't have a job anymore. I do feel like most advocates would also be like, now what do I do? Because it's kind of a huge part of who we are, but it's absolutely one of the things I think most, if not all of us, are working toward. So thank you so much. That's the last of my questions. So just as a sign off, if you have a way that you would like people to get in contact with you, if they have more specific questions, if that's something you're comfortable with sharing, I'll give you some space to do that before we sign off.
Mm-hmm. Aneja, would you like to go first?
Sure. If you all have more questions for just access in general and what services we provide, what we do, first I'd say check out our website, www.assaultcarecenter.org, and then you can kind of find out our general resources there. But if you'd like to get specific questions regarding Domestic Violence Awareness Month, or about domestic abuse, and you're in crisis, please call our crisis line. There's a national line as well as local lines, and so I can give you our local line now just in case. It's 515-292-0519, and that's listed on our social media, on our website, and you can always just reach out that way. And you can find my name and my contact information on our website as well.
We have offices in Des Moines and in Marshalltown. Our website is in its last stages of construction and redesign, and it will be alive soon. It is www.luna.org. We do have a 24-hour crisis line. It is 1-866-256-7668. The Des Moines office is reachable Monday through Friday, 8 to 5:30. We are open. We are receiving clients. We're taking appropriate precautions. And I would encourage anyone who has either issues of domestic violence in their own home, or has a loved one or a friend, having a little bit of support can be a great tool to support a survivor and that family. So definitely reach out. We'll be happy to talk. And if we're not close, we'll work with our local partners and get you what you need.
Remember, if it is an emergency, please call 911 first.
911.
and then reach out to all of us.
100%. Yep. 911 is a great resource if it's an immediate emergency. Thank you so much for sharing that information, and thank you for your time. I believe we're going to have a few more of these Facebook Lives for DVAM, so stay in touch on our Facebook, and don't be afraid to reach out to those resources if that's something you need. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.